Hey there. If you enjoy my work, please take a moment to like the video. I need your help if I'm going to resurrect this channel. Imagine you're a child living in a beautiful home with your family when a mysterious entity takes a disturbing and dangerous interest in you. Find out what happened in this particular case out of the deserts of Nevada. If you listen carefully, you might even spot a cryptid in this story as well. Dear Mr. X, my name is Tammy. I was listening to one of your Dogman stories when I got hit by a long-buried memory from my childhood. I grew up in Nevada in the late 1980s. The desert, middle of nowhere, a town of maybe 300 people on a good day. The nearest grocery store was over 45 minutes drive away. We didn't even have traffic lights. We did have the one stop sign, which was nice. I remember there used to be this yearly tarantula migration where thousands upon thousands of giant spiders would pass through the town all at once. I even saw it with my own eyes. It was like an undulating black carpet slowly moving along the ground. We weren't allowed outside on those days. The town was full of openings in the ground that led to abandoned mine shafts and pitfalls. If you didn't know where to look, you could easily fall in. Unfortunately, there were more than a few accidents of that sort. There was running water in most buildings, but not all of them, and our school was just one big room every grade had to share. The place was teeming with some pretty intense wildlife. Family pets had to be closely guarded to make sure they didn't become another link in the food chain. As a matter of fact, there were so many problems with violent animals that the townspeople used to set up bear traps and other devices to protect their homes. I come from a pretty large family and had many siblings. With both my parents working out of town, my eldest sister, Emily, used to watch over us kids. One quiet evening, just as twilight was beginning to fall, the serene silence of the house was interrupted by a loud knock at the front door. It startled us, because normally we can hear any incoming visitors as they walk up the steps and the small landing to get to our front door. This time we heard nothing. Emily went to answer the door. As soon as she got there, she began to scream. My heart sank as her voice cut through the air. Confused and a bit dazed, I got up and jogged toward her as my other siblings brushed by to see what the commotion was about. As I turned the corner to see out the half-screen door leading to the porch, I saw what looked like a large coyote standing on its hind legs. I was in shock as the rest of my siblings scrambled about the small, cramped hallway, now trying to get as far away from the door as they could. I, on the other hand, was sort of paralyzed, unfazed by the mayhem it had caused. The creature at the door opened its mouth disturbingly wide, revealing sharp teeth and a deep red tongue, as a round, black object rolled out of its mouth and dropped between its legs onto the welcome mat on the porch. Everyone froze at the thud of the object hitting the ground. The silence returned as the bizarre animal stared us down through the screen door, cold air wafting in from outside and bringing with it the musty odor of wilderness, sweat and blood. I forced my eyes to look down, breaking eye contact with the beast. To my horror, my eyes locked onto a heartbreaking image. The last thing I would have expected to see on the floor of my porch that lovely evening. The object that fell from the monster's gaping maw was my cat's head. My breathing went shallow and I covered my mouth. I looked back into the dead eyes of the canine standing at the door, as still as if it were dead. After a few moments, the creature calmly turned and walked back down the steps, still in an upright position. It walked away until it vanished into the darkness. Emily was the first to recover from the shocking event. She snapped out of it like a trance and began dashing around the house, locking doors and windows before herding us all into our parents' room. She stood guard with a baseball bat until my parents finally got home in the middle of the night. In that little town, so many strange things happened that just about every family had a story or two just as unbelievable as that one. If you'd like, I'll share one more. One of the few places in the town that had actual green grass and trees was the small cemetery. It was the only place that was at all pleasing to look at. So many of the kids used to play there. Given the mysterious history of our town's mines, it was common knowledge that the town was haunted, and that spirits would follow people home on occasion. And we were all, for the most part, sort of fine with it. If you're wondering how we ended up in this peculiar place, my parents moved there upon my grandmother's suggestion. She found an old house that they could actually afford. I was pretty young at the time, but when we were first moving in, I remember seeing a woman in a pale yellow dress standing next to a dog on our porch, staring at me. I didn't think it was too strange because several people I didn't know were around the house, helping us unload our boxes from the moving truck. The next day I saw her again, standing out on the porch with the dog, her long black hair blowing in the wind. This time, though, no one else was around for me to rationalize her being there, so I asked my mom if she was a neighbor. My mom asked me what woman I was talking about. She couldn't see anything. I told her that I kept seeing the woman in the yellow dress, but neither my mom nor my siblings had ever seen her. She kept showing up every so often. I would always see her out on the porch. That is, until one day, when I was surprised to find her standing just inside the door. Up to that point, I'd only seen her from a distance. She looked pretty normal from there. However, when she came inside, I finally saw her up close and could tell that there was something off about her, something wrong with her eyes. They were so dark. The closer I looked, the more I realized that they were just empty holes dug into her head. It was like she wanted me to see. She stood there, her expression still and blank as I examined her disturbing visage. Her hair seemed matted and greasy, and I could see the outlines of the bones in her legs and arms. As a haunting, crooked smile cracked its way onto her face, a visceral terror crept into my mind, and I ran away. Any time I saw her after that, I would immediately seek out one of my parents or siblings. Even though I knew they couldn't see her, at least I wouldn't be alone with her. Eventually, the woman began coming into my room at night. I shared a room with Emily, and the woman in yellow would wait until she was asleep before walking in and standing next to my bed, looming over me with that same unnerving smile. I would cry silently as she touched my face and hair. Her fingers were so cold that it hurt my skin. Whenever I saw her outside, she would wave her hand, beckoning me to follow her. I started to tell myself that maybe if I did what she wanted, she would leave me alone at last. I would never get more than a few steps in her direction before stopping myself. Whenever I stopped, she would furrow her brow and pout at me before evaporating into thin air. I could tell it made her really angry. Over time, despite my best efforts, I somehow made it more and more steps in her direction when she would call me. I'm not sure if I was just curious to know what would happen, or if I was somehow being compelled to do so, to cooperate. One day, I was outside playing with my brother when I wandered off. She appeared moments later, almost like she was waiting for me to be distracted. I remember her smiling and nodding, waving her hands with big, exaggerated motions as I drew closer to her. Oddly, my memory sort of cuts out at that moment. The next thing I remember is looking up at my mom as she held me in her arms, running as fast as she could to get home. When we got home, my mother almost broke the door down getting inside. She was frantic. When she finally gathered herself, she told me I was only 2 or 3 steps away from falling down a mine shaft in the farther reaches of our backyard. The opening was covered with sand and a plank of wood, so it was barely visible. Underneath the surface was a sheer drop of over 100 feet. As you might imagine, I would not have survived. My mother pulled me tightly to her chest and whispered something into my ear. I saw her. I saw the woman in the yellow dress. Honey, she's dead. You need to stay away from her. I didn't see the woman for several days after that. However, it wasn't too long before she started showing up again, but something was different. She began appearing only at night in various parts of the house, still beckoning to me as usual. Another difference was that whenever I ignored her, she wouldn't simply evaporate away. She would just stand there staring at me, with this twisted expression of intense anger and hatred. I remember one day playing with toy cars in the hallway with my brother. As I sat with my back against a bookshelf, a book suddenly fell down next to me. I looked up with a mild curiosity, only to see a swell of several more books moving forward off the shelf above my head. The books began to fall. Each empty space revealed another part of the woman's sneering face. She glared at me with eyes as black as coal. Before I could get my bearings to move far enough away, the entire bookcase tipped over on me. My brother started screaming, alerting my mother. Luckily, all I had were a few bumps and bruises, but I also had a black eye. No idea how I got it, to be honest. From that day on, my mom was able to see the woman in yellow. I don't think the woman liked it because she never smiled at me again. When she visited me in the night, she would choke me with her icy cold hands, pull out clumps of my hair, scratch me, slap me, and even bite me on some occasions. Things would fly off my dresser and hit me really hard. The kitchen stove would flare up without warning whenever I went near it. The toaster and microwave caught fire when I tried to use them. My family members have even seen me fall downstairs as though I'd been violently pushed. Doors would swing open and hit me as I walked by. Possibly strangest of all, snakes, lizards, and even scorpions would be found under my blankets or in my toy box at home. My mom got fed up and decided to have the house blessed by a priest. She also went about looking into its history. After a few days of investigation, she found a picture of a previous inhabitant, a woman with a dog, and a curly-haired little girl. My eyes focused in on the girl. Her big brown eyes and shy smile gave her an eerie resemblance to me. My mom had the house blessed again, just to be extra sure, I guess, and the woman in yellow never returned. Years later, when I had grown up, I was spending some time looking through old photos. I noticed for the first time how beat up and exhausted I looked in all the photos. I asked my mom if she ever learned anything more about the woman in yellow, and she told me that the woman used to live in our old house. Her name was May, and of course, her daughter died at a young age. Every member of May's family passed away one by one for various reasons, leaving her the only survivor of her name. She lived to an old, feeble age before suffering a long, painful death due to cancer. My mom believed that May stayed in our world, holding on, perhaps not knowing where else to go. Maybe when we moved in, she thought, or even hoped, that I was her lost daughter. I sometimes wonder about her intentions with me. I think she was trying to get me to join her. Whatever it was she wanted, I'm glad she didn't get it from me. Warmest regards, Tammy. Alright, so there's lots to discuss with this one. It's one of my favorite stories from a few years ago. I rewrote it for this video and built out the atmosphere a bit more for this version. I hope you liked it. The story is actually connected to another one from Tammy that I spoke about. I did another kind of revamping, remastering, rewriting and all that a while back, and you all asked me to revisit this one as well because of the connection between the two, and of course I must deliver. I'll try to remember to put a link to the other story in the description box for this one. So one thing I realized about the original version was that for some reason I chose to very briefly mention that insane dogman encounter that happened toward the beginning. I fleshed that out quite a bit for this version, no pun intended, with the word flesh there. But yeah, the mental image of a giant canine standing with a giant, unusually wide open mouth, dead-eyed, silent, I find that to be extremely unsettling. Not to mention it dropping the severed head of a beloved pet out of its mouth. It's also crazy to imagine an invincible, malevolent entity constantly trying to lure kids into possibly falling to their deaths. Not to mention just constantly tormenting the child physically and mentally as well. It's insane. It made me wonder if past accidents in the town. There are two things I was wondering. Number one, all the past accidents of people falling down those holes in the town, I wonder if they were connected to May, the ghost of May, this woman who is clearly an unresting spirit, if there is such a thing. And also, I'm wondering if the fact that they've had all these violent encounters with animals might have something to do with this bizarre coyote-like dogman-esque creature that killed Tammy's cat. I really wonder if creatures like that are responsible for all the violent encounters that people are having with the wildlife in that area. So, the life of May, the woman in the yellow dress, the ghost, the specter, the phantom, or I don't even know if those are the correct words for that, but I believe phantoms are things that can, maybe it was poltergeist? I'm not sure. Maybe I should be more well versed in that, those differences there. But she suffered so much pain up until the very day she died, unfortunately. And it kind of makes me think, what if the increased, the high level of anguish and pain and suffering that she went through increased the strength of the mark that she would leave on the fabric of the human collective consciousness, maybe resulting in like an echo that some people can perceive. I'm sure not everyone can perceive the presence of such an entity unless they come into contact with it, but imagine if the people who had the power to see her are the ones that ended up dying. Okay, maybe I need to explain this a little bit more. Say in the hypothetical scenario where only certain types of people are able to see May, and she has this vendetta, this penchant for luring people to their death. But the people that she's able to lure to her death are people who are who are uniquely able to see her and perceive her presence. And one would think that those are the only type of people that could actually help her in the endeavor of moving over to the other side or finding peace or whatever the case may be. Only people who can actually see her would be able to do anything to help her at all. But she's killing those people by luring them to their death, by making them fall down these abandoned mine shafts. Just kind of a little mini narrative that I thought of in my head that would be a very tragic outcome. You know, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. She's sad and upset and unable to rest and unable to find peace in the afterlife, but she's removing, or she's really killing, the only people who could have any chance of helping her free herself from that never-ending cycle. Very unfortunate. I would assume that would be a miserable existence, you know, never being able to leave and break away from that because of the pain that she suffered in life. I really hope that that's not what lies ahead for any of us in the real world here. So, what questions or comments do you have about this story? What do you think the dogman had to do with any of this? Or do you think it's just a random thing? Or, I don't know, maybe what if May's dog is somehow related to this dogman who killed Tammy's cat? That's another thing just popped into my head. I figured I'd throw it out there. Interesting to think about. So, here's another question for you. Have you ever seen a town covered in a carpet of spiders? One of the most terrifying things in this entire story. And then lastly, how would you respond to a ghostly woman waving at you to come closer to her? What would you do if you saw that? All some pretty great questions. So, now I'm going to open up the live chat here, see what the dreamers had to say about this story. So remember, if you want a chance to have your question or comment show up during a future video, or even the chance to sponsor one of my videos with a super chat, turn on notifications so you catch the live reading and discussions. Alright, so Ramona the Pest says, it's common in times of flood for spiders to take to the trees, buildings, or anything above water. So I guess that would explain the tarantula carpet that we had there in this story. Priscilla Rose says, I wonder if the dogman is part of it because it's attracted to the darkness of the woman. That's an interesting idea. What if these unusual or otherworldly creatures are attracted to, these sort of psychic epicenters of negative human energy. And that house was specifically home to such a person, and I could see that being a sort of beacon of energy for creatures that are a little bit beyond the norm there. Interesting idea to think about. Ambar says, I've always thought that if you acknowledge a malevolent ghost or entity, they will attach themselves to you. Fatal attraction, like being addicted to the thrill of being noticed in a timeless realm. That is a really, really interesting idea. If you take for a second, if you grant that these entities or are actual conscious entities or consciousness, or they possess their own consciousness, they're somehow sentient in some way, they might be experiencing time totally differently or not at all. And if you're able to sort of be seen or acknowledged by something that is experiencing time, maybe that would actually give you some type of anchor, something something to remind you of what it's like to be bound by time once again. That's a very haunting story. I mean, a very haunting idea. So LittleOwl says, it reminds me of the film The Grudge. Violent death of a woman causes her spirit to linger and exact revenge on the living. Read many other similar theories as well. Also, I agree with Amber. Yeah, that is definitely reminiscent of that. To me, the idea, one of the creepiest images in my mind when I think about and read and hear this story is the fact that the woman is like jumping up and down excitedly, waving her hands around in this exaggerated motion because she's so excited that she might be able to finally cause this girl to fall to her death. That is so heartbreakingly scary to me. Alright, so that's about where we're going to end this video for today. If you're still listening, type the word spiders into your comment down below so I can see who the real dreamers are. Alright, my friends, until next time. This episode was sponsored by Dreamers Like You. Samantha, Cindy S., Lorie Long, Ina Cook, Leann, Ellie, Ambar, Zen 2011, Shinfitz, Terico, Reuk, LittleOwl, Dolly, Priscilla, Sylvia, AestheticWaif. Thank you all so much. All right. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, don't forget to like and share. If you made it to the very end, you're exactly the kind of subscriber I'm looking for. Don't forget to turn on those notifications. That way, you can catch the live show and discuss the stories with me. Your input might even appear in my next video. Last thing, if you heard a code word after the story, type it in a comment down below so I know who the real dreamers are. Take care, my friend. Until next time.